Hey everyone, it is time to review Code Vein. At last, I am coming for you, Code Vein 2. In any case, I do recommend to play at least God Eater 3 before jumping here, so you can get part of the idea of what happened in between. Cause yes, they are connected, but it is not a "oh, I am going to miss the whole thing," aside from little interesting details that will pass over your head without shame or glory. Whatever the case, you know the drill for reviews in this channel. After finishing the game, let's check the story, gameplay, graphics, and music. Without further ado, let's begin. In this time around, and as it is usual in this series, there is another destroyed city. What happened? No idea, but the MC isn't in good shape, and seems like things were taking a sour turn. However, our lil fella knew what to do. Unfortunately, problems didn't end there, cause they get caught and used as cheap labor to acquire blood beads. That is how the MC gets thrown into a hellhole. Down the line they meet one of the members who previously jumped into this place. For their surprise, it was already too late. Revenants who get exposed to the miasma eventually lose themselves. And things weren't going as planned cause Oliver gets hurt, or at least his mask was damaged. His time is already ticking. But it is impossible to stop here, cause the MC needs blood beads to get his companion back. In due time, and with help of a stranger, a blood spring is found in the way. With this, there's no more reason to stay here, so our duo looks for a way to the surface. This is where they find Oliver. Nonetheless, this wasn't going to end in a peaceful way. After this confrontation, what is left is but a piece of vestige, a corrupted stone able to transform Revenants into another Lost. However, the MC is another absolute unit as in previous entries, and takes the vestige as if nothing, turning Oliver's powers into his own. And this is the beginning of a brighter future, as he's able to restore missiles, activate blood springs, and absorb vestiges. Now, what can I say about future events? This game took inspiration from Souls games, yes, that is clear, but Code Vein follows a similar idea like in God Eater games, where after another cataclysmic event, and in the verge of disaster, some human beings got turned into immortal beings, or in this case, the Revenants. So now we have humans and Revenants, with the distinction that if they don't take blood beads, things go downhill. And in addition, both humans and Revenants are trapped in some sort of dome. Along the way, you will start to get why things led to this direction, and of course, how God Eater is linked here. To me, it is a good story. Maybe not the most original way to continue the whole mess since God Eater, but I'll buy the idea. In any case, I am not sure these scenes where you check the Revenants' memories was the best way to tell their side of the tale. In the end, it can turn things a bit stagnant, because you have to do this every time you complete a vestige. I won't deny that some stories are amazing, sad and melancholic as heck, but maybe these memories could have been managed slightly different, mainly because you can get plenty of vestiges before returning to the base, and then all you do is jump into these scenes over and over again. Maybe it would have been better if the game threw these scenes as you find or complete vestiges. Something that could have been improved were the side stories, as the ones where you help a dude get his weapon, others to find something or look after his friends, and things like that. Unlike Souls games, where in general there are amazing developments behind those characters, here things felt a bit trivial, so yeah, they ended up being forgettable. In the end, I enjoy this tale. To me, it is an 8. I don't give it a higher score because some ideas were kinda cut, as if the main plot was going to be another. Imagine that I mentioned something about the sun, but I never mention it or show it ever again. Okay. Like that, there were some ideas that I never understood why they were mentioned, so no idea to be honest. Gameplay wise, the first thing I have to point out is, please do not make tutorials like this one. It isn't a good idea to confine the player right away. It is better if mechanics are explained as you advance, or let the player experiment, because otherwise these kinds of things diminish the journey. Okay, with that out of the way, I was asked some weeks ago to share my opinion about difficulty in games, and to be honest, that is something really subjective, but I'll try to measure things in a decent way, rather than taking extreme examples like the ones I have shared in that video. With that in mind, games like Cookie Poke are a 1, and 10 could be something like The Evil Within Platinum. To me this game is a 6 at best. The hardest thing here wasn't even a boss, but an invasion that happens in the middle of the game. Or at least, that was something I had to retry like 6-8 times more or less. Now, if you want to make the game harder, it is simple. Leave your party member at the base and tackle everything on your own. Simple like that. On that front, party members in this game are quite powerful, so that would be the easiest way to finish this game. I didn't try it, but it should be doable to just support your partner and let them do all the work. Now, the general design in Code Vein is a straight line. There are almost no areas where you can decide between multiple directions like, oh yeah, I wanna go into this, that or the other place. So it isn't that complicated to traverse. The only kinda complicated place you will tackle is the cathedral, but in all seriousness, if it was possible to see your trail since the first version of the game, then yeah, this place isn't as convoluted as some people mention. Of course, this comment comes from someone who has finished these kinds of levels, and comparing both of them, the cathedral is a walk in the park. My best recommendation is, take it easy and try to make a mental map as you advance. Almost every place is reachable without that much of an issue. Aside from this and the other area, the general level design is quite friendly, having limited options to hide things, so just check your trail every now and then, and you should be fine. Now, it is worth taking your time searching because that way you can get interesting weapons and new blood codes, which work as jobs. Since early, you will have some of them, and every now and then you will receive new ones. The thing to keep in mind is the kind of gameplay you want to have. Big weapons are slow, small weapons are in general fast, so everything depends from the way you synergy your blood code, veil, and passive skills, which develop specific attributes for the kinds of weapons you can use in an effective way, and the kinds of active skills that will help the most. Once you have understood how the system works, you can own enemies without many issues, even bosses, as you can stagger them quite constantly. Once again, to me the hardest thing were invasions. Then there were a couple of bosses that required some tries. Of course, this is going to depend from your experience, but in general, you want to always attack their backs, because you can abuse some systems to the point where the experience turns a bit laughable at times. My only complaint here is that items could have been much more useful or slightly mandatory in some cases. For example, in Bloodborne, Blood-Starved Beast is easy to tackle if you throw some blood here and there. Same if you use electric papers against the newborn, but here I didn't really find a purpose for so many items. There are no real reasons to further investigate ways to take down some enemies, so that is something that could have been polished in a better way. The same goes for elements and stuff like that. Sure, they exist, but there is no real need to change your equipment for that kind of things. Maybe you can bring a kind of convoluted combination between ailments and specific skills, but considering the general difficulty of the game, I don't think that is needed unless you decide to tackle the whole journey alone. It is fair to mention that, in general, I don't respect these games. If enemies and level design can be cheap in their ways, then bringing cheap tricks isn't that big of an issue. So yeah, abuse the system however you want, there are no rules here. However, in the end to me, Code Vein had an entertaining gameplay. I will give it an 8.5. Because there are numerous ways to advance the game, which is something nice if you wanna try a friendly Soulsborne, considering that there are no punishing restrictions as others in the genre. In the graphics section I check glitches, aesthetics and other creative ideas, and unfortunately the game froze once. What's cool is that there are plenty of autosaves, but I don't know, I lost like 20 minutes because oftentimes the idea was to explore as much as possible and down the line come back to recover in case I didn't find a missile. So you had me going through an emotional scene when it closed. You see that these are realistic moments? Other detail worth mentioning is that depending from the distance of the enemies and if they are out of bounds to fight, in general they look laggy. Which is funny, but don't worry about these hiccups. It doesn't happen when you're fighting them, or at least I didn't experience that. Aside from this, I didn't experience other issues. On the contrary, I really like the way in which the game shows different environments and ideas. You will see some cities, icy places, caves, and so on. The artistic direction of the game is quite beautiful. Maybe some enemies could have been a bit more in the ugly side, reminiscent to God Eater enemies. because at some point you fight a pole dancer and I don't know, sure, I don't mind the fan service and those things, but I would have preferred to fight a horrid monster rather than this. Considering the way in which this world works, it is not that outrageous to see something like her, but the impact is quite different if we compare this with this. Just saying. To me the graphics are a 9. In the end, there are many beautiful and fantastic ideas. Sure, there are some things that could have been worked a bit more, but for the most part, the visuals were superb. And last but not least, the music. As previous entries, once again, Go Shiina is the main composer, but for the most part I will say that Code Vein moved slightly more into instrumentals and vocals. Yes, there are a couple of tracks that take previous ideas between electronic and orchestral executions, but in general this OST is more about orchestral compositions. What is worth mentioning is that you won't hear those orchestral executions all the time. In most levels there's no music, until you start to fight an enemy or huge groups of enemies, and that is where it loops between orchestra and electronic, depending from the number of enemies that go after you. And it works quite well, because there are some invasions where they spawn, and this feels quite immersive with the level of action you can have. And on the other way around, where the game wants you to get a bit melancholic, it swings radically to the other side with a track named Memory of the Lost. The way in which it builds up is simply good. When you empathize with some of these characters and how they suffer to reach some points, and these tracks start to play, it feels like a kick in the nerve to cry. It is simply beautiful. As for bosses, I won't question why they got inspired from Souls games. The fact is that 2 stages builds up tension, because most of first parts are kinda slow and melodious, where on the other hand the second stage feels like they are going seriously after you, so it works quite well. To me the soundtrack is a 9. If you're into orchestral music, you will listen many extraordinary executions here. Code Vein final score is an 8.6. I believe it was a really good game, but I cannot recommend it for everyone, particularly because of the kind of gameplay it has. I don't mind hard games, but I know plenty of people can struggle with these entries. In any case, for those who also don't really mind that, yeah, it was a good experience. Sure, there are several things that could have been changed for the better, but considering previous entries and how this one adapts to throw something different, it works fine for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.